Hey there friends, Dave Paulides, Can-Am Missing Project. Copyrighted edition for our video channel. This is a missing person segment, and we're going to throw in a little bit of news with it, trail news, so don't turn away. This is going to be about some ways to hopefully save your life if you're confronted with what happened to a couple of brothers I'm going to tell you about. Story appeared a couple days ago, 3 days ago, 4 days ago. California Press Democrat. California had its first fatal mountain lion attack in 20 years. A mountain lion fatally attacked a 21-year-old man on Saturday in El Dorado County, also injuring his younger brother. It was the first time in 2 decades that a cougar killed a person in California. Here's when and where the accident or the attack happened, and why it's such a rare occurrence in a state that boasts 4,500 of the elusive creatures. At about 1 p.m. Saturday, in a remote part of El Dorado National Forest, 21-year-old Talon Brooks and 18-year-old Wyatt Brooks were searching for deer antler sheds on a hilly, forested landscape. Wyatt Brooks survived the attack but sustained traumatic injuries, his family said. His brother's death is the first of its kind since 2004, when a 35-year-old man was killed in Whiting Ranch Regional Park in Orange County. Where did the fatal mountain lion attack happen? 5 miles southeast of Georgetown on Darling Ridge Road near Skid Road, not far from Dutch Canyon, according to dispatchers. The area is within the El Dorado National Forest, 70 miles northeast of downtown Sacramento. It's a rural area of El Dorado County, accessible by 1-lane paved road that cuts through the forest. No hunting and no trespassing signs are posted throughout the area, which is dotted with homes and ranches situated off roadways behind metal gates. Throughout the area, herds of deers, flocks of turkeys can be seen, as well as cattle and horses grazing at different ranch properties. On Saturday afternoon, more than a dozen deer could be seen grazing along Highway 193 a few miles from the site of the attack. Mountain lions have large ranges up to 10 by 10 miles. Saturday's attack may have been from an animal that was still young and looking for its own territory, said Josh Rosenau, Director of Policy and Advocacy for the nonprofit Mountain Lion Foundation. How common are mountain lion attacks? Extremely rare, as large cats are more interested in avoiding human contact than not. Let me give you a statistic. In the last 110 years, there have been 110 mountain lion fatalities in North America. A lot of people say, oh, missing 411, it must be done by mountain lions that kill the people, drag them away and eat them. No, no, it's not happening. Read on with the story. When something like this happens, it's obviously scary, but it's still worth bearing in mind how rare this is and how much mountain lions try to avoid people when they can. 4,500 mountain lions in the state of California, including this attack in El Dorado County. There have been 22 documented mountain lion attacks involving 24 people in California since 1986, according to the Department of Fish and Game. Last fatal one in Northern California was 1994, when a woman was killed in Auburn State Recreation Area. Not that far from where this incident happened. The cats are typically found in mountains, as the name suggests, urban fringes and open spaces from foggy coastal forests and eastern deserts. There's a group of mountain lions in Santa Monica Mountains and the Hollywood Hills in Southern California. Mountain lions occasionally show up in suburban Sacramento. They eat deer, turkeys, skunks, dogs, house cats. Yep. There are specially protected species in California, according to the Department of Fish and Game. Some 46% of California's topography is considered a suitable habitat, according to the Mountain Lion Foundation. The only habitual locations for the cat in the state are in the Central Valley and in most of California deserts. Mountain lions tend to hunt alone at night, according to the County of San Diego Parks and Recreation. How much do mountain lions weigh? Mountain lion responsible for this attack, which was euthanized this weekend, weighed 90 pounds. It was a male, officials said. Adult male lions can weigh 130 to 150 pounds. Adult females weigh 65 to 90. Here's what to do if you see one. Although it's very rare to encounter a mountain lion, below are some tips. If you plan to go on a hike, consider going with a friend, just as Dave says. If you're going alone, avoid hiking around dusk or dawn. See, but these two boys were attacked at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Keep small children close to you when exploring the outdoors, as Dave always says. It is also advised to keep dogs on a leash at all times. Mountain lions do not like dogs. In states where you can hunt mountain lions, dogs are often used to hunt the lions and force them up trees. Mountain lions do not want to confront a dog. If you do encounter a mountain lion, do not approach the animal or run from it. If the mountain view is within view, do not crouch or bend. It is also important to note if you are confronted by the animal that it has an escape route. The animal tends to avoid confrontation. Mountain lion that killed the man and injured his brother is euthanized in California. Two brothers, 18 and 21, were antler shed hunting near Georgetown. Attack left one brother dead with bad facial wounds. California Department of Fish and Game said the mountain lion involved in the attack was euthanized. The department said Sunday that its wild forensics lab matched DNA from the mountain lion, which was found near Georgetown, to DNA found at the scene of the attack. The younger brother called 911 at 1:13 p.m. to report being separated from his older brother during the attack. Deputies began searching the area, and at 1:46 they found the mountain lion crouched next to the older deceased brother. Shots were fired to scare the animal away. I'm sorry. If I was the deputy on scene, I would have killed the animal. And some of you are going to say, well, why is that, Dave? Well, mountain lions specifically, it's been proven that once they get a taste and the success of taking down an adult human, they will continue to do it. So you can't have that animal alive in the woods anymore, otherwise it'll be stalking hikers. It's a very sad thing. I know many hunters in California are very irate at the Mountain Lion Foundation that they don't allow hunting because they believe that mountain lions are starting to overwhelm the state. And confrontations with humans are going to be more and more as time goes on. The reason I'm telling you this story, if you get confronted by a mountain lion, make yourself look big. Don't run. Big. If you're with somebody else, hold hands together. Make each of you look huge. Don't scream or yell. Don't look directly in its eyes, but don't look away. If you have a gun, draw the gun. Be prepared. I read this story and I felt so bad for the surviving brother that has to live with what happened for the rest of his life. It's horrific. But as I stated on Twitter, I believe something was wrong with this lion. Attacking two people is almost unheard of. And as light as the lion was, I'm wondering if it was injured in some way or... There's so much wildlife in that area, as the article said, that any lion that was even in remotely decent shape should be able to kill anything it wants up there. So that's my mountain lion story for today. Oh, one more story. When I was working in Hoopa, one day I was going up a logging road, dusty road. And I was walking like 5 miles back into this area. I was armed. But I had a backpack. I walk up into there. Took me like 3 or 4 hours. Sat, had lunch, took a few pictures, walked back out, going down the logging road again. And I'm looking over, what? What? In my tracks on that dusty road huge mountain lion tracks. I mean, they say to 150 pounds. Colorado, I've seen them over 200 pounds. So this one was the biggest paw prints I've ever seen. It was huge. I thought, holy crap. Yeah, I had my head on a swivel after that. That taught me a lesson. Don't be melancholy while you're on the trail. Pay attention, Dave. Good Lord was looking over me that day. So, let's talk about these missing persons cases. First one is an Australia case. Way in the middle of nowhere, Australia, a little boy named Edward Jefferies. A little older than normal that we talk about, 8 years old. There aren't a lot of 8-year-olds that disappear. March 31st, 1933 at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 20 miles southeast of Walcha, near Mona, Australia. Now that's along the eastern coast. Here's the eastern coast. Walcha is right here. Mona is about 20 miles away. Very, very thick, lush, wild. And I underline very. Get a little closer for you. There's nothing out here. Well, he lived with his parents in a city called Maitland. And he was coming out to spend time with his aunt and uncle because he liked it. He had been there earlier in January and spent some time. And yet when he was there in January, he actually disappeared for 2 hours. His aunt and uncle, Mr. and Mrs. Lawrence, found him. No big deal. But the area was described as very thick vegetation, big trees, gorges, and lots of wildlife. Now, March 31st, about 3 o'clock, Mrs. Lawrence allowed Edward to go out, play in the yard, as long as he stayed close. And he hadn't. He hadn't gone anywhere, said he wouldn't. Well, at about 3 o'clock that day, she went in and checked on him. Couldn't find him in the yard where he was supposed to be. Searched all around, couldn't find him. Contacted her husband. He responded. And then they started calling neighbors. And they searched through the night. Now remember, this is very remote, folks. I'm sure they were working under the belief they were going to find him quickly, just like they did last time. Well, they searched all the way through the night. And then early on April 1st, they contacted the local police. And they explained the circumstances. The local police did a brilliant thing. In their minds, they said, okay, these people know their property, plantation. They've searched it all night. They can't find him. We're probably not going to find him quickly. So let's call Aboriginal trackers. Now, Aboriginal trackers are on the same level as Native American trackers. The best trackers in the world. If I was ever on a search and I could get them in, they'd be there. I guarantee it. You put your humility aside and all that great training people get. No, these men and women know how to track. So they called up and they got a series of Aboriginal trackers to respond. Now, that first day after he disappeared, it was raining hard, freezing temperatures, heavy wind, atrocious conditions to search under. And the Lawrences told searchers something very puzzling. They said that Edward left barefoot, dressed very lightly, no coat, no food, no water. They says that they searched the whole night. They didn't hear any screams, no yells, no nothing. Well, they did get out in the field that day. April 1st, they searched all day, nothing. April 2nd and 3rd, same thing. 200 searchers, freezing rain. They had police mounted unit there that was searching an area of 2-mile radius from the point last seen. They had ground pounders, and they had those Aboriginal trackers. April 4th. They extended the search out to 3 miles because they felt they had over 95% covered at 2 miles. The police made a report to the press that they weren't optimistic that Edward could be alive. It was too cold. It was still raining incessantly. It had hindered their search efforts. Aboriginal trackers had reported they hadn't found any tracks. And that's puzzling because they're the best. Then on April 5th, the press interviewed Aboriginal trackers who said they didn't believe the boy could be alive under these conditions, leaving as he did. And on that day, several of the searchers had to go home because they had bad colds and influenza. April 6th, the search got dropped down to 80 searchers. Working under horrific conditions, they pushed the search and rescue out to 5-mile radius. And that included some of the gorges in the area. And they were all searched. Everybody was puzzled because many thought that the trackers would find Edward quickly. But they were equally puzzled that they weren't finding what they normally would find. Now, even though rains would wash away some tracks, trackers are way better than that. They're looking for very subtle signs. A bent piece of grass. Something pushed down in an odd way. I mean, their eye for this is phenomenal. April 7th, 60 searchers are now in the field. Many had gone home at the end of this day, and that was the very first day that they had good weather since the disappearance. Police had about 30 people on April 8th. They searched the rest of the day, searched areas that had been searched 3, 4, 5 times. The report stated intensive search effort for 8 days. They used the best trackers in the world. They found nothing. Not one thing. Weather impeded the search. That was mentioned many times. So you got weather. And now I want to tell you something that I've talked about infrequently, but it's something I want you to be aware of. When children disappear, the vast majority of the time, the father is not at the location where they disappeared from. And I'm not sure what to make of that. Now, that's not every time, but the vast majority of times this is true. And I can't explain it, but it's something to keep in the back of your head. Next case, entirely different scenario. Different country, different aged man. This is a case out of Alaska. It involves a young man, 24 years old, named Charles Rudmann. Went missing August 4th, 1956. Born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, and he was a senior at Kent State University, majoring in wildlife conservation. Now, in that winter of 55-56, Charles saw an ad for a job with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Alaska. And he went and he interviewed for it, and he got the job. And he landed a very prestigious job as a stream guard assigned to Houghton Bay, Alaska. Now, this is very remote, to say the least. So this is a place called Admiralty Island. Dave has actually fished that island before. And I probably saw 10 bear the day I was there. We were all heavily armed. Lots of bear. This is where he disappeared. This is the bay. This is the Tongass National Forest. Let me tell you something about this area right here. This is Devil's Thumb. That area out there is probably some of the most wild area in North America. Guaranteed probably 50% of that land has never had a human on it. I know that because I know some people that work the Tongass National Forest. They said it was spooky. It was as wild could get. Take that for whatever it's worth. So back to Charles. Got the job, and May through June he went through training, specialized training, to be a stream guard. And then he was assigned out to Houghton Bay, and his contacts were U.S. Fish and Wildlife agents and Alaska State Troopers. But he was on his own. Now, when I read this, I thought, oh man, I would have done that job. But knowing what I know, that's stupidity. They hadn't put him through any law enforcement academies. He wasn't armed. And he was living in a commercial type tent in Houghton Bay. And Fish and Wildlife allowed him to have a rifle because he liked to hunt. It's generally a very lonely job in an isolated area. So in late June, he arrives in Houghton Bay. His supervisor was a man named Donald McKiernan. And McKiernan was assigned as the commercial fisheries administrator for Alaska. Really good job. Now, Charles's job was to enforce salmon fishing regulations to commercial fishermen in that Houghton Bay area. Much of that area is closed to salmon fishing because of breeding, and they're going upstream right there, and sensitive area. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife gave Charles a 16-foot skiff with a motor to use. And then he had a commercial tent with a rifle and all the other necessities you'd have to live in that remote area. Everything was going well. July went well. And then they started to get into August. Now understand something. Charles's job was to enforce commercial salmon fishing regulations. So he's dealing with very experienced commercial fishermen. And he's on his own. A very sensitive area to work when you find a violation and you're alone on a boat with a bunch of commercial guys. Well, McKiernan hadn't heard from him around the 1st of August. So he waited a while, still hadn't heard from him, so he sent a couple of Fish and Wildlife agents out to check on him. Well, when the agents arrived, the first thing they saw out in the middle of the bay was Charles's skiff, with the outboard motor still had its cover, like a cloth cover that was put over it so water didn't hit it. Meaning that nobody was in the boat with the engine running, because you never run the engine with that cloth cover on it. So they think that's odd. So they get the boat back in, and they start looking around. And on an adjacent island, not far away, they find Charles's life preserver. Well, the boat was sitting just as it normally would in the water. No water was in the boat. It wasn't damaged. So winds can really howl through that area. So they thought, well, maybe strong wind blew the life preserver out. It hadn't been worn. It wasn't buckled. So they make their way inland to Charles's tent. And they look around, and everything is there that should be there, except his rifle and his boots. Now, I'm sure they're thinking like I'm thinking. He's not going to take his rifle when he enters a boat, because that would be against policy. The only time you're going to take your rifle is when you're going to go up in the mountains and you're going to hunt. Or something happened outside the tent. Grizzly bear, something came out. I don't know. But everything seemed normal. Well, then they started to go through his citation book. And they found that on June 1st, that he had cited a boat for fishing in closed waters. And as the agents are walking around, they get pulled over by another fishing boat. And they say, hey, we know who let that boat, that skiff loose into the bay. Agents go, what do you mean? We saw who did it. So they named the guy, a fisherman named Bert McKay. So they go over and talk to Bert. He denies it. But they have a good witness, 3 witnesses. And they do some research, and Bert McKay was on the boat that Charles cited on August 1st. That's interesting to me. But, big but here. If you're on a commercial fishing boat and you don't want Charles to come out and check your boat to see how many salmon you have, see if they're the right size, etc. Well, if Charles doesn't have a boat to come out in, you're pretty much free. And if you had hurt or killed Charles, then what would be the point of letting the boat free? Wouldn't be a point. So some of the articles made an innuendo that there was possible criminal involvement. I don't see it. I'm sorry, I don't see it unless there's something else that they're not saying. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife asked the FBI to look into it. I never heard anything more about that, and I never could find anything more about it. U.S. Fish and Wildlife made a massive search, air and ground, of that hills in the immediate area where Charles would have went hunting. Didn't find anything. Now, Bert was arraigned for interfering and impeding a federal officer. Charles was considered a federal officer, and he was arraigned in Juneau. Never heard if he pled guilty or if it was dismissed or what. Now, no tracks of an unusual nature were found around the tent. There was no sign of a crime. No camps were found up in the mountains where Charles might have been. Well, my take on this, and I hope U.S. Fish and Wildlife learned something. You don't take somebody so young, without life experiences, and you put them alone in dangerous conditions like they did. That is stupidity. I don't blame Charles for taking the job, because I would have taken it. Now, in my humble opinion, they should have put 2 people there, back each other up. But being unarmed and doing that job, while Charles was on duty, he couldn't carry a firearm. I think the rifle was there because he wanted to hunt and to protect himself in case a grizzly bear came into his camp. But massive search that went on for over a month, they didn't find anything. Charles was never found. I think it's a highly unusual case. Number one, because this area of Alaska has had a lot of hunters disappear. That's another reason why we're talking about it. It fits within that cluster area down in Alaska. And I've discovered that just within the last year. Now, in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking bear, because Admiralty Island, which I showed you is just next door, has tons of bear. I'm sure that the ground that he was on had tons of bear. And grizzly bear, in my mind, are 10 times more dangerous than cougars. The amount of grizzly bear attacks in Montana in an average year, 2 to 3. And if you're lucky, you survive. Right now, there's a push by Washington to implant grizzly bear in northern Washington. And there are a bunch of Washington people highly upset because they don't want them. Yeah, I don't blame them. I wouldn't want them around my area either. They're dangerous, they're sneaky, they're on you before you know it. And you could shoot one of those bears, and if it's not a good placement on a shot, they're going to still come and kill you. There's been a lot of hunters in Montana that have been attacked. Yeah, hunters. So, grizzly bear, dangerous animal. So that's the 2 stories for today. I suppose I should clarify. I don't believe Charles was a victim of a crime. I do think that he was lost in those mountains somewhere. And if Charles would have had a personal locator beacon, they didn't exist back then, but if he had, good chance he would have been found. Personal locator beacon. I don't talk about this enough. Everybody who goes into the woods should have one. You activate it, sends it up to a satellite, and the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration will find you within 10 feet. They'll call a search and rescue group that's closest to that. They'll find you within 10 feet, that GPS marker. They cost about $300. You can buy them on Amazon, REI. People ask me, what do I recommend? They all work. I have one that's waterproof. You don't need one that takes a monthly subscription. You don't need that. So, for what it's worth, just read the reviews, find the company, go to the company's website and order it. And if you have a family member that likes to hike alone, it's the perfect gift. I appreciate you being here. Remember to be kind, be friendly, help people that are in distress. I've got a lot of positive feedback about our hats. Liberty. Know what liberty means. In the next few years, that'll be one of the most important words in your vocabulary. Liberty. Get the hat. Get my book, Missing 411 Washington, at NA, like North America, BigfootSearch.com. Go to the online store. Paulides out.